What's going on, guys? DJ Deadman here, back for today's iteration of The Dead Rise. Today is a great episode that I have planned. A lot of it is more discussion than news, really. We're going to talk about adaptations and, how they go. It'll make sense later, but I'm going to start you off with some music, a song that's surprisingly on brand in terms of the name. This is The Dead Rise, that's the show name, and I'm going to play Back from the Dead by Hailstorm. If you recall, last episode I mentioned a heavy metal band with a female lead, and it is truly a great song. I hope you guys enjoy, and here it is. Hello, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed that music break. Welcome back to The Dead Rise with yours truly, DJ Deadman. That first song, as I mentioned, was I'm Back from the Dead by Hailstorm. Great, great band. I love their energy. I first heard them in the video game Guitar Hero Live. If you're anyone familiar with the Guitar Hero franchise, it was one of my favorite songs on that game. It really changed up the formula. Specifically, the song in the game was, I believe it was called Love Bites, and So Do I. It's still one of my favorite songs. Unfortunately, Hailstorm is a very, how do I put this very nicely? They're a very explicit band, if you catch my drift. A lot of their songs say words and talk about subjects that I unfortunately can't go over on this radio show. But some of my favorite songs include Love Bites, I Miss the Misery, Ms. Hyde with MZ instead of MS, and I Get Off. Those are some of my favorites from them. I do recommend them, especially if you love that heavy metal sort of energy. Like iTunes classified them as rock, but it is what it is. And that second one was, of course, Mambo Number 5, a very popular song. I'm sure we've all heard it at some point in our lives. But yeah, welcome, and we're gonna go ahead and start off our topic today in what was the word that I used? Um Adaptations, there you go. Couldn't remember the word. Anyways, today I wanted to talk about adaptations. Maybe I'll get to some news later on. I do have unfortunate news, another pass away, but if we get there, we get there. I wanted to talk about adaptations more than anything. Earlier this kind of comes with the story. So earlier this week, I was on my phone looking through YouTube, and all of a sudden I see this ad for The Louder House, I think it was called. Nickelodeon has this cartoon called The Loud House, which essentially is about. I've seen a couple of episodes. I've seen a couple of episodes where it's focused on the main character Lincoln and how he has like 9 sisters or something like that, 8 sisters. He has a bunch of sisters, and it's basically his life. It's a cartoon, very silly, very funny, that kind of stuff. I've never chosen to watch it, if that makes sense. Like anytime that I've seen it, I've been at like, I don't know, CC's with the TV in the background, or at the doctor's office with it playing right there, you know what I mean? That's how I've familiarized with the show. It's come out pretty often, and it comes out because it's one of like the few cartoons that are on Nickelodeon right now that's noteworthy besides like SpongeBob. It's funny that Nickelodeon has kind of gone through phases in a way. Like I remember when I was a kid, it was going through this sort of animation, that was its focus. They had a bunch of cartoons, and eventually it went through this phase where like they kind of grew out of it. Like they started doing the Schneiderverse, or what I like to call the Schneider era, where Dan Snyder kind of like, with his success of Drake and Josh, basically gave him the power to do a bunch of these live action shows, iCarly, Victorious, Game Shakers, Henry Danger, all these live action shows. And, eventually they started going down in ratings. And of course, if you know anything about Dan Schneider, you know that he was a very, let's just say, suspicious character. He did quite a bit of stuff, some stuff that I can't name here, but he was a very awful person. Quick Google or YouTube search about him might give you the information if you don't have any context. But let me know if you want me to talk about him one day. Anyways, getting back on point. After the decline in ratings, they're kind of like trying to get back into animation, but they've been struggling quite a bit. Like the only real animation they kept was SpongeBob, and like even that arguably has been on the decline as of recent. But Loud House was a bit of, I don't want to say a success, but it was a bit like I looked it up and it was giving them quite decent reviews compared to its other shows at the time. And people kind of believed the Loud House to be like this new age of animation that we're gonna get at Nickelodeon. But then I saw the ad that I mentioned at the beginning of the show, The Louder House. It's this live action adaptation of the cartoon. And oh boy. I saw it and I was, again, for context, I'm not a fan of The Loud House, all right? Like I said, I've seen it in like the background of places, but I've never like actively paid attention, or I've never actively sat down on my couch and put the show on. So, maybe there's a little bit of bias here, but a live action adaptation of a cartoon. This isn't the first time that Nickelodeon has tried this. You know, they're I don't want to call it a fiasco, but there was a huge controversy when they wanted to basically remake Fairy Odd Parents into a live action show. And if you paid attention how that went, it went pretty horrible. It was lazy, the CGI was terrible. The show just didn't do that well. And even that wasn't the first time they made Fairy Odd Parents into live action. There was the holiday movie and the other movie that Drake Bell, oh, he has his own reputation right now, but Drake Bell was in as Timmy Turner, and like those they were all right, but at the end of the day they were just kind of like gimmicks, like, oh, it's fun to see these cartoons as live action, but not for a whole show. And that's what I was thinking when I saw the trailer for The Louder House. Like, when I was a kid, at some point I was a kid, and I'm like, by the way, like, I'm kind of convinced that the executives at Nickelodeon were never kids. But anyway, there was a point in time when I was a kid, and my cousin, who might be listening right now, shout out to you, Ashley, if you're listening, she knows this. When I was a kid, I went through this phase where, like, all I wanted to watch were cartoons. Like, I didn't want to watch anything live action unless it was, like, Star Wars. Anything else was, like, boring to me, live action. All I wanted to watch was cartoons. So, you know, maybe kids aren't like how I was, but I assume they are at least similar. And so I'm thinking, like, what kids want to watch the live action version of their favorite cartoon? Because I'm sure there are kids who like The Loud House, you know? And like, I don't see the appeal. Like, I look back into the cartoons that I liked, I liked Ben 10, which also got a live action. And like, I'm thinking to myself, I mean, the live action was cool, don't get me wrong, it was fun to watch, but I would probably just keep watching the cartoon if they had like made it a series. And I just don't understand the thought process. Like, for one, animation gives you so much more creative freedom when it comes to things. And I think that's like the whole point of animation. Like, the whole point of having an animated show is that these animators can sort of go crazy and like do things that wouldn't be realistic. They can do this kind of animated humor that you can't get in real life. And these live action shows try to do that. They try to have this sort of animated comedy to them, but it's very hard to do. Only a few movies have been able to kind of capitalize in that regard. When we come back, I'll talk about some movies that I think did it well and some movies that I think could use work. But for now, I'm gonna show you guys some messages from our other DJ. So if you enjoy my show, please be sure to listen to the other one, as well as play the next song, which will be All Along the Watchtower by Jimi Hendrix. So if you're a fan, stay tuned. Only on Vaquero Radio, the Valley Student Station. That was All Along the Watchtower by Jimi Hendrix. Very great song. If you listen to the lyrics, it's actually telling a story about some knights trying to rescue a princess. But interestingly enough, the story doesn't have an ending. If you listen closely, there's no real conclusion to what they're doing. And honestly, I'm not sure why he chose to do it like this, but hey, I think it's a little bit interesting that he kind of left it open to really anyone. I like to think that the guitar solo that ends off the song is somewhat of a fight song, as if there was a fight going on, and we don't get to see the conclusion. Do the good guys win? Do the bad guys lose? Maybe the bad guys win. Who knows? I just think that's a little bit interesting of a little nod there. But yeah, going back to our topic in what we were talking about, which again, I forgot the word, but adaptations. There you go. Adaptations. I have bad memory. Anyways, what I had talked about a little bit before we went on that break was that animation is a form of media that allows animators and anyone really to be creative. With animation, you could do so much more than you can do in live action. And I think that's a tool that is often not taken advantage of, which leads to this sort of debate about animation. Is it for kids? I just want you to think about that for a second. Animation, is it for kids? Because most people might say, yeah, it is. But I like to differ. I don't think animation was created for kids. Yes, a good chunk of kids' media is animation, cartoons, stuff like that. But I don't think it's solely for kids. And it seems that we're getting to a point where more adult animation is coming out and sort of getting the spotlight. I think the most well-known one right now is probably Rick and Morty. Personally, I'm not a fan, but that's just me. I don't find it very intriguing, but it is an adult animated show. But what I've noticed is again, most, not all, but most animated adult shows are geared towards comedy. You have Family Guy, Simpsons, Rick and Morty, Paradise PD, Big Mouth. A lot of them are very adult, but the reason they're adult is because they all seem to have this, like, okay, not all of them, but a good chunk of them has this sort of like, what's the phrase I'm looking for? Like gross out humor. Very almost childish humor in the sense that it's very not mature is what I'm trying to say. Mature in the sense of the content. Like they're talking about adult things that children probably shouldn't hear, but in terms of comedy it's very not mature. It's very gross humor. It's gags. And you know, talking about adaptations kind of turned into this talk about animation in general and how I think it's underutilized because animation can tell such great stories. Um, DC, I talk about DC a lot on this show, but DC had a pretty good catalog of animated movies. They had The Dark Knight Returns, which is one of my favorite comic books of all time, and they had an animated adaptation of it, and I think it was good. I think they did well, and it had a lot of things that probably would have been very difficult to do in live action. Not impossible, but very difficult. And it was adult, but not because it had like gross out humor, not because the subject matter it was talking about was pure adult. It's just it had mature themes. It had, there was violence, there was blood. It had mature themes of vigilantism and is it right, and animation was able to tell that story. I think another good example of animation not being for kids and being able to be taken advantage of is anime. I wouldn't consider myself a huge anime fan. I do watch some. I recently did go to Anime Fest, but just ignore that, put that to the side. I'm not a huge fan. I don't watch every single show that comes out. I'm not that kind of person that you could ask, hey, what happened in episode 127, and I'd be able to name it. I'm not that kind of guy. But, but, anime tells a lot of mature stories. Attack on Titan, Full Metal Alchemist, Demon Slayer. A lot of these are very mature shows because of the subject matter. It has violence, it has, gore. Well, gore is probably the wrong word, more like blood. Okay, maybe gore for Attack on Titan. But but they tackle mature themes and they're able to tell great stories. They're not doing it with gross out humor. They're not doing it like to make fun of, you know, body parts. like Big Mouth. I think Big Mouth gets judged a whole lot because a lot of it is just very immature sort of humor. I mean, on one hand, I get it because that's kind of the point, you know? When people say it's like complaining about that, then I'm like, well, why are you even watching the show? That's kind of the point, you know? It's kind of expected. But people argue that it's not even funny. And at that point, then feel free to judge it as much as you want. But I feel like animation could be utilized a lot more, especially here in the West, which, you know, here in the United States. I feel like we're so accustomed to animation being for kids because of companies like Disney and Pixar. Don't get me wrong, they're great. They're great, and I think anyone can enjoy Disney and Pixar, you know, not just kids. I enjoy Disney Pixar. So they're great, don't get me wrong. But I do feel like we can do more with that. We can do more with animation, but people are so used to this sort of family friendly image for animation that we don't tend to think outside the box, if that makes sense. That's just the way I see it. You know, that's why I've kind of started going into anime because they can tell these stories through animation. They could show these beautiful images moving and tell such gripping stories. And, you know, they relate to me and they relate to adults. You know, they're told and adults can understand. But I don't really get that much here for Western shows. Sure, we have a lot of good live action ones. I'm rewatching Breaking Bad with my roommate right now, which, oh boy, Breaking Bad, another interesting show. It's not an adaptation, but one I think is going to. Sorry, I kind of brain fart right there. But Breaking Bad, I'm rewatching it, and you know that's an adult, mature show, but it's not animated. And don't get me wrong, I can watch live action now, but again, I just feel like animation's underutilized. But speaking of Breaking Bad, that's going to bring us to my next topic about crime and how it's depicted in media. Specifically, I'm going to talk about a very well known and popular show right now on the Netflix. So if you've been keeping up, you may already guess what I'm going to talk about. But I'm gonna have to leave you off on another music break. Gonna play some messages from my friends here. So once again, if you enjoy my show, be sure to tune into our other shows. We have shows during the week weekly, so if any of these catch your fancy, do please listen to it. And after that, I'm going to play you some Welcome to the Jungle by Guns N' Roses, only on Vaquero Radio, the Valley Student Station. Back, listeners, I hope you enjoyed Welcome to the Jungle by Guns N' Roses. I love the energy. One of my favorite songs. Who doesn't like Welcome to the Jungle, honestly? I think that's a better question because, if you don't like it, I don't know. I think there's something up. Anyways, last time we left off, I mentioned Breaking Bad and how the next topic was going to be how crime is depicted in media. Specifically, I wanted to talk about a show that's been going around on Netflix that many people have been talking about, either for good or for worse, and that's been the biopic of Jeffrey Dahmer. In case you don't know, he was a serial killer who did a lot of very gruesome and evil acts. I won't go too into detail here because, well, I don't think I can, but if you are curious, again, quick Google or YouTube search will give you more details on that, but I'm not sure if you really want to know. All you need to know is he murdered quite a bit of people. And they made a biopic of him in Netflix. Netflix has a huge what's the word? Discoverography? I'm probably butchered that, but they have a huge catalog, is a better word, catalog of crime documentaries and crime shows. They made Wicked, Shockingly Evil, which talked about Ted Bundy, but this one's been making its rounds because of how real it feels. I myself watched some of the show, I haven't finished it yet, and let me tell you, it can get scary at times. There are moments where I legitimately felt uncomfortable watching it. I do think that's the point, though. I do want to mention that. I do think that's the point. But this show specifically has drummed up controversy because, well, there's a huge debate going on about it right now. Some people think that the show has seemingly glorified the violence and murders that he did. Others think that it's good that they made the show because, well, it's showing what happened. It's informing us. Others have taken a more middle of the road kind of stance, and some people don't even know about what's going on at all. And this is an interesting debate because they're unlike some other serial killers, which I don't know too much about. I'm not gonna sit here and act like a expert on the matter, so do correct me if I'm wrong here. But there are a few families of victims who are still alive in Dahmer's case, and a lot of them, specifically, I think there was one family that I read about, were not only not informed about the show being created, but apparently they even claimed that the show misrepresented some real events, and they're kind of pissed, rightfully so. I think they have the right to be pissed that there's a show who literally shows their family member, their significant other, get murked, um, you know, see their lives end on a TV show. And I believe they're even getting to a point that they're planning on taking it to court. And it's like I said, it sparked this whole debate on how they're portraying Jeffrey Dahmer. And I just want to talk about it a little bit because something very similar happened when the Joker movie came out. The Joker movie, many people feared was going to glorify Joker's actions. They were afraid that it was going to glorify the violence that he was going to create. And then it was a different argument now because at the end of the day, as much as I love Joker and I truly defend the movie sometimes, saying that it makes you feel bad for him, but it never tries to excuse his crimes. At the end of the day, Joker's fictional. It's a fictional character. It's a fictional movie. Never happened. As real as it might seem, it's fictional. Dahmer, though, it's an interesting case because it is about a real person. This person really did exist. The crimes that he commits on the show really did happen, unfortunately. The victims shown and depicted in the show were real people, and the families that were affected are not only real people, but they're still out there today. And so that kind of changes the debate, and it says, like, well, where's the line here? Because I think the whole argument at this point is, how do you define glorifying violence? That's, where is the line here? Because what's the difference from an action movie, say John Wick? I'm just throwing a movie out there. John Wick also depicts a character essentially murdering a lot of people. Um, sure enough, they had guns and stuff, and again, different circumstances, fictional, non-fictional, stuff like that. But the point that I'm trying to make is, at what point do you say a form of media, whether it's a movie, TV show, book, anime, game, whatever, where's the line? At what point are they glorifying the violence? Because when I was watching Dahmer, I had very similar opinions to like Joker. It's showing you his life, and sure, he had a lot of crappy moments in his life, as anyone does. I think everyone has those moments. And sometimes you know, it was unfortunate seeing what he had to go through. But I don't think the show ever tries to excuse what he's doing. I do think the show is still telling you, like, hey, they're not condoning his actions. These are evil acts. I don't throw evil lightly, but I mean, what else could it have been? Like, it was evil for him to do these things. And that's what the show is. That's the debate that the show is sparking. I'm just the messenger. I think, it's a debate on how far is too far, is essentially. Because again, we live in a society where violence is in a lot of TV shows now. And I think at this point, violence is almost unavoidable. Aside from maybe a few genres like romance or kid shows, we're going to see violence in places. And I think we're at a point where we can't really revert back. People are entertained by it. But I do think we, as a collective society, need to like figure out how far is too far. Is Dahmer too far? Because again, comparing this to Joker, who was also a mass murderer. But again, it's different because one is about a real person and one is about a fictional person. So, should we stop making movies about real people? Like, again, Netflix made Wicked Shockingly Evil, which was about Ted Bundy. I watched that movie, all of it. I've seen the whole thing. And correct me if I'm wrong, I could be wrong, but I don't think this controversy was really talked about then. Albeit, the difference is that that movie didn't really show his crimes. It was mostly about him avoiding trial and them talking about the things that he did and him being arrested for it. Dahmer actively shows him committing these acts. And I think that's why this debate is starting now rather than before, because it's showing what he did. And some people believe that that's too far, it's glorifying it. But what is the definition of glorifying? Are they condoning the actions? Are they essentially letting it happen? That's the debate here. And sure, Dahmer, it was well made. I think it was well made. From a filmmaking stance, it was a well made show. But this kind of comes into question moralities. Was it moral to make this movie? Especially when, as mentioned, they did not inform families who were affected by this man. They didn't inform them that his crimes were going to be depicted. Their family members who were unfortunately taken from this world were going to be depicted. And, who knows? I don't know if there's a right answer to this. I really don't know. But I do think it's an interesting topic nonetheless. I do think it's an interesting discussion that we're having right now. And, one can argue that our society is very tied to crime. We have so many crime documentaries. We have so many biopics of, people who committed crimes. So, like, are those problems as well? Like, this is something we need to talk about. We need to set limits. We need to define them. But it's hard because when it comes to glorifying violence, I think it's muddy. We can't really define it that well. But who knows? Maybe we can, and maybe we just need to talk about it. Who knows? Really, I'm just a radio host, messenger, telling you all the situation. But, if you enjoyed the show, you enjoyed the show. If you think that it should be taken out or something similar shouldn't be made, more power to you. I'm past my talk time, so we're going to go into a quick music break. For now, here's Fly Me to the Moon by Frank Sinatra. Enjoy. Speaking of crime, that was our stinger from Detective Hour. So if you think you'll enjoy it, tune in on Tuesdays from 3 to 4. It's a great show. I'm sure you'll like it. Let's continue this talk on how crime is depicted. But let's get into the more fictional side. I know we talked about Dahmer, which, as mentioned, real person, real crimes, real unfortunate events. And, Netflix has a extensive catalog of true crime. That's how much. This is what I meant when I said a little earlier that our entertainment media as a society, we're kind of obsessed with crime. Is that we have a genre name for it, true crime. Usually you see it more under podcasts and, I just said the word documentaries. But nonetheless, there is a genre for it now. So I think that goes to show you just how intrigued we are at lawlessness, at crime. But again, not my debate to answer. Just wanted to let you all know what's going on. But I still want to keep in the topic of crime depicted because, as mentioned, we have fictional shows as well. We have, I was comparing Dahmer to Joker, but we also have shows such as The Sopranos, which is about a crime family. Probably one of the most well-known shows right now, and arguably one of the best, has been Breaking Bad, which I'm currently watching. So maybe this is just my way to segue to, maybe this is my way of segueing into one of my favorite shows. But still, it's funny that in Breaking Bad, we're almost rooting for the drug dealer. Not the drug dealer, the drug maker. For those of you who may not know what Breaking Bad is about, it follows a chemistry teacher named Walter White who unfortunately was diagnosed with cancer, a very aggressive form. I believe they don't believe he's going to live. And he's very low income to the point where he's working two jobs. And being a chemistry teacher and an expert in the field, he kind of gets this idea from watching his brother-in-law bust a drug ring. He gets this idea to start cooking. I don't personally know if I could say the drug's name on this show, so just to be safe, I'm not gonna say it, but he starts making a certain drug, and that's what the show's about. His, I don't want to say adventures, but the way his life is turning upside down, going getting more and more worse. He starts getting more and more, I don't want to say the word evil, but he gets more crime eccentric. I don't know. That's not. I made that up. My point is that he's really becoming a criminal, and the show kind of sees his downward spiral towards that as he tries to like build an empire and originally trying to get money for his family. It's a very good show. I recommend it. It's a very well made show. But I brought it up because, as mentioned, we're almost rooting for him. Like, we're. I would like to think we as a society, when we hear about stories like this, we're glad that they're caught, red handed. But in this story, we're rooting for him. We're like wanting him to succeed. And I think this is interesting because it brings up to question our morals. Are we cheering for him for the crime, or are we cheering for him because we know him? That's the important distinction, I think, because we see the story from his perspective. We see his struggles. We see why he did it. He didn't just wake up one day and decided to live this kind of lifestyle. In his mind, he was kind of forced to. Like, that was the only way he saw out of his problem. And the fact that he was sick kind of meant that, like, he could go out with a bang, pretty much. Or maybe that's the wrong phrase. I think the better phrase is that, like, even if he's caught, he's not going to last very long anyway. So I think that's his mindset. And I think it's interesting because we're in a way seeing the bad guy's perspective. I think in any normal show, it would have been about his brother-in-law. His brother-in-law is part of DEA, who is the drug and I forgot what. I don't know what DEA stands for by memory, but I know that they like do drug busts. And normally in a show, it might have been a cop show. We follow his brother-in-law. Maybe the whole plot twist would have been that it turns out his brother-in-law was a kingpin. But in this show, we're not watching it from the brother-in-law's perspective. We're watching it from Walter's. And I think that's the distinction, because normally I'd never root for someone who was doing that kind of stuff. Never. But I saw what led him down that road. And I think that's why Joker worked for me as well. I saw these events happen from his perspective, and I felt bad for him. Same thing with Walter White. Felt bad for what happened. So I see why they went down the destructive path. Do I ever feel like the show is excusing it? Do I ever feel like the show, or in Joker's case, movie, is trying to tell me that what they did was good? No. I never felt that way at any point in these shows. And I think that's the slippery slope that they have to avoid, because in a way they have to make a likable character. They have to make a character that people will care about. But they know that people shouldn't be rooting for these characters. And I think that's the challenge of making a movie centered around essentially a villain. That's what goes on in Breaking Bad as well. And it's a perfect balance, and I think it works. I think that's why Breaking Bad was so popular, that like it it was different. It came out of left field. It was different from the norm. Usually, like I said, we would have gotten a cop show. But in this case, we got the show about the bad guys, and we saw things from their perspective. Very good show, and I'm glad to be rewatching it with my roommate. Don't know if he's listening, but if he is, Jacob, you're a real one. Um, Very good. They've so good they made a sideshow about it. Better Call Saul. So many memes have come out of that, and again, it's just interesting. This whole episode of The Dead Rise has been very interesting. Kind of looking back at how we depict crime. I know we started with animation and how animation is depicted here in the West, but I just still think it's interesting how we depict crime in media. We're obsessed with it. There's a genre about it, true crime, and I'll admit I listen to true crime podcasts. I watch true crime documentaries. So even I have this sort of like, I don't want to say obsession, but I have this intrigue in the topic. And maybe it's because most of us aren't exposed to this kind of stuff. I think I want to think for the most part that a good majority of people have never committed a crime. And so when we hear about stories about people who choose to live this kind of life, who choose to break the law, go down this destructive path, I think it intrigues us because we're like, what led them to this? Why do they do the things they do? And sometimes it's heartbreaking. I think one documentary that I talked about this weekend with my girlfriend was about, I forget his name, but he ended the lives of his wife and two kids, and we watched a documentary about it, and it always makes me sad watching that, to know that the only reason he did it was to essentially go with another woman. Like, terrible people. Um, but it's that intrigue. Like, why would he do that? Why would he do this? I think it's that intrigue, that morbid curiosity that makes us want to watch crime, makes us want to learn about it, makes us want to not engage, but makes us want to learn about how people are engaging in crime. So that's just my personal theory of why we're so obsessed with crime, why we're so obsessed with violence in media, because that's not the normal world for most of us. Unfortunately, we live in a society where it is the reality for some people. Maybe not society. I think world is better. We unfortunately live in a world where that is the reality for some people, and it's unfortunate. So, who knows? Again, that's just the perspective of one DJ Deadman. We're getting to the end of the hour here, so I just want to take a quick minute to thank each and every one of you. Shout out to each and every one of you listening. Knowing that people are listening to my show really gets me going, and I'm glad to hear it. So I hope you enjoyed today's show. I hope I was able to kind of open that dialogue a little bit, and if I'm totally off base, let me know. Let me know your opinions as well. I love to hear them. Anyways, as I said, end of the hour. Unfortunately, I gotta go, but I'm gonna leave you off with a goodie. A very underrated song that not a lot of people listen to. This is Rock of Ages by Def Leppard, only on Vaquero Radio, the Valley Student Station.